Are you familiar with the Diary of the CEO podcast with Stephen Bartlett? He's a UK entrepreneur, but the podcast is basically the biggest podcast in the world at the moment.
Hmm.
And his most popular podcast is with this woman called Dr. Tara Swart. I've made a few reaction clips to her claims that she was making on this podcast because
Okay.
they're utter bollocks. They're just shite. And I've used my language. They're completely crazy. There's about six claims she made that I found just verifiable evidence that not just that she wasn't saying the truth, but it was the exact opposite. And
Okay.
one of the claims that she made was that there's two things that we can do to improve neuroplasticity in the brain. Two of the most important, and one of them is aerobic exercise. Fine, great. Yeah, I'd say that's number one. The second one is eating dark-skinned fruits. And and I just immediately paused the video and was like, did I just hallucinate? So what do you think? Because I'm fascinated by myths, like neuro myths that are very popular and that people still believe.
Yeah.
What do you think are some of the most common myths that people hold about the brain?
Yeah.
The average listener today has a mental model of their own brain, of all brains, of how brains work.
Yeah.
What is one or two things that they hold about their brain that are most likely to just be completely false?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's some classic ones like the idea that we only use 10% of our brain.
Right.
It's just like it's hard for a neuroscientist to even know what that claim means. Like,
Yeah.
what do you even talk? Like, which
There's no
10%?
electrical activity in timbre. Yeah. Just yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And that one's funny because, in fact, uh, neurons are really energetically expensive, right? And if you look at actually the principles of how brains are put together, they are ruthlessly efficient, right? They're going to take in as little information as they can. They're going to pass as little information as they need to with as few electrical spikes as they can get away with. And so, the idea that you would have this expensive, metabolically expensive brain tissue just sitting around not doing anything is just absurd. The other aspect I think of that is, though, that when you ask the people what do you do with your brain, they'll say I think with my brain, right? But they won't say I control my physiology with my brain. They don't we don't often think of it as a physiological control system. They may not even say things like I see with my brain, or I feel, that where you've got a good, what, two-fifths of your brain there is like visual system, right? So there's a whole bunch of stuff that's going on in your brain that you're not aware of, that isn't part of an activity that you would call thinking, that sort of mental, real cogitation, that you can kind of feel yourself doing, talking to yourself in your head. Um, so that's another myth, I think, is the idea that brains are for thinking. Um, to my mind, brains are control systems, and the thinking bits are just like a really sophisticated part of that control system.
Hmm. Lisa, are you familiar with Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett? I think she's
Yeah.
absolutely brilliant. Two of her, I've been obsessed with her scientific work in the last year or so. She wrote two amazing books about how emotions are made, and
Yeah.
she very neatly summarizes what the brain does to regulate the body's resources. I
Yeah.
think that's
So
one of the best short, because again, it's hard to give like a short definition of what the brain does. It does so much, but
yeah,
one of the things that it does is just to manage the body's resources.
yeah,
I think that's a very appropriate sort of definition that you can give. That's most accurate.
yeah. No, I think that's right. And so I haven't read her books, but I know her work. I actually sort of quibble with her on the question of
Oh, let's go.
whether emotions are kind of pre-configured in a way, or always have to develop, in each individual. I think there's probably an interplay there. But
Explain that a little bit more. I'm curious
well,
on
so
what.
my understanding with I don't want to speak too much to her claim, but my
Yeah.
understanding of it is that she thinks that these emotions are somehow learned, whereas I would say they're quite basic, fundamental homeostatic signals that evolution pre-configures, um, and that of course we learn what they mean, and we learn when we're having an emotion how, what we should attribute it to out in the world or in ourselves or
Hmm.
or so on. And so I just wanted to point out there are some alternate theories to hers on where emotions come from, but I think the general point is really good, right?
Yeah.
So that's another myth, I would say, that emotion and cognition are somehow opposed to each other,
Yeah.
and we can't do cognition properly without having the emotional signals, because what we have to do when we're thinking about what to do in the world is we have to weigh up different scenarios, different potential outcomes, different drives and goals that are competing and conflicting within us at any moment. And those emotional signals help us do that. And if we didn't have them, we couldn't logic our way through, right? We have to. This is again, behavior is a kind of a form of homeostasis.
Yeah.
If we're out of whack somehow, if our fuel is too low, then we have to do something to remedy that.
Yeah.
So we need to have those signals as part of our cognitive system. On the other hand, of course, we don't want them to just be driving our behavior in a very sort of automatic way that we can't rationally control. And I would say, in fact, over evolution and over the maturation of individual human beings, it's precisely those systems for rationally controlling our action that is what gives us free will. That's what I would call. I
Yeah.
did want to mention one other one about a myth, which is about neuroplasticity.
Uh-huh.
So this was really popular maybe 15 years ago. All these books about neuroplasticity and how the like things titles like the brain that can change itself and stuff like that. And they merged into the self-help realm
Very
very
much so.
quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was taking some observations from neuroscience, but then really, really saying, look, here's what this means for you in your life. And if I'm going to be a little cynical here, but like if you buy my book and read this thing, then
Yeah,
you'll learn how
buy my
to
course. There's
how to
so many
rewire your brain. Right?
neuroplasticity courses online now. I'm not like yeah, I don't know what's in them. I'm not saying they're all complete bullshit, but like there's 1,000. No one needs an 1,000 euro neuroplasticity
Yeah,
course. It's just I don't know what could possibly be in that.
yeah, I know I don't either, and so um, yeah, those claims are just really, really overblown. Like parts of the brain can reconfigure a bit. For example, in early people who are blind early on, what would be visual cortex can take on different functions and so on. But even there's a limit to it. Later on, the sort of claims of being able to massively reorganize brain circuits are just there's just no good evidence for those really. Of course, what does happen is little bit like on a microcircuit level, on a synaptic level, of course, your brain's changing all the time, right? That's how we learn things. That's how we remember things.
Yeah.
And the counter position is not that your brain is fixed and you can't change anything. It's just that you change through learning, and we can change our habits, if we try hard enough, and we can adopt new policies and ways of behaving and so on within some limits.
Yeah.
It's often effortful if we're really going against ingrained, personality traits or habits. But there's no point telling people that there's this magic sort of possibility of just being however any which way you
Yeah.
want to be.
All you have to do know that all you have to do is brush your teeth with your left hand, and that triggers immense amount of neuroplasticity in the brain, and that means you can learn Spanish better. I don't know if you knew that. There's
Is that a real one?
oh, that's absolutely a real one.
Brilliant.
Jim Quick is, I think, a bit an absolute charlatan, to be honest. But he says a lot of these things. He spouts a lot about left brain, right brain, a lot about multiple intelligence theory,
Yeah,
a
yeah,
lot of
yeah.
these models that don't really have any predictive ability in the real world. He's
Mm.
basically saying, just do different things every day, and that will inherently make your brain more neuroplastic in every way. And maybe there's a tiny bit of weight to like I'm not saying don't do new things. I'm a big advocate for like learn a new musical instrument, these things, but it doesn't have magical powers. And he seems to ascribe a huge benefit to left hand to teeth washing and left hand cup drinking and things like this, of just activating the other motor hemisphere that you don't use that often.
Well, it's a great example of one of these things where, uh, if you hear a claim, well, some simple intervention like that, that sounds with tremendous sort of potential supposed impact. Well, it's just not true. I mean, just beware, right? It's and there's so many claims out there like that of these very, very modest interventions which are supposed to have life-changing effect afterwards. And I mean, anyone who's been alive and paying attention to the way things go should be suspicious of
It's
that kind.
obvious. And it wouldn't even be adaptive for the brain to be able to change that much, right? I mean, you wouldn't want rapid reorganization of the brain because you did something that took 10 minutes. You
Exactly.
like the brain needs to be responsive to, okay, you're doing this. You've been say like I'm training for a triathlon at the moment and I'm, dedicating 15 hours a week to this. That's something where I'm like, over a year, over a couple of years, that could have an impact on my brain physically because it's an actual very sizable amount of hours per week, you know?
Sure. Yeah.
But any of these other things where it's just you're expecting a 5 minute fix to have rapid changes in the brain, it wouldn't
Yeah.
even be adaptive for that. That's not, doesn't even make
Well,
sense. It wouldn't be useful. It wouldn't be good.
yeah. Like what happens in the next 5 minutes or the next, like how it's just, it's an odd, yeah, it's inconsistent with itself, right? It's an incoherent claim. This 10 minutes can have huge effects because the next 10 minutes could undo it, right? If it's that plastic. Exactly. And so, but you touch on a really important point because there is a stage at which humans have this really protracted period of juvenile development where we're learning, we're playing, we're exploring while our brains are maturing, while those circuits are being sculpted, and we have this ability thereby to adapt to our own personal experiences through some time period, right? So our brains really do get shaped in certain ways. They get shaped, for example, by the languages that we hear. And so our brains get almost, configured for a particular language, so much so that we can't even hear the distinctions between, say, vowel sounds in French or tonal sounds in Mandarin or something like that. And babies can hear the difference between those, but older people can't. So, so we have this period of becoming, right, where we're learning with the world, we're adapting as we go, but then at some point we just have to stop. We just have to be, right? We have to stop becoming and just be, and that matches with very clear changes in neuroplasticity, and you lose the wholesale kind of activity dependent remapping that can happen, and you retain just the micro structural synaptic plasticity, but yeah, I mean, there's very clear biology underlying that change, critical periods and closure of critical periods and so on. And there's also very good ecological life history reasons why you want to stop learning from everything that you encounter, and why it's useful to have some habits just so you can get through life,
Yeah,
right?
of
Yeah.
course. What do you think, just to wrap this neuroplasticity conversation in a bow, because I think it's really interesting, and you're dead right that it has been co-opted by the self-improvement space as a buzzword now to sort of stay nimble, stay flexible, and stay young, which I think everyone wants to do. The answer is just that it's way harder to do than these solutions will let you believe.
Yeah.
What are, I'd say beyond sleep, exercise, and diet, which I think are the obvious ones for improving neuroplasticity, do you think that is good research behind anything except for that health triad, which does keep your brain more nimble, more flexible, more, just young, more
Well,
plastic?
so, I mean, the first question is why would you want it to be more plastic, right? I mean, that in itself is a claim that's often made. It's like the basic premise is more plastic is better. And everything I was just saying about that life history where the plasticity gets tamped down at a certain point argues against that, right? If more plasticity was better, we would have more plasticity going, for longer. So there's a reason why plasticity gets tamped down, and part of it is that we um, develop, a crystallized intelligence where basically it means we're learning about the world, and we have to, in order to keep that knowledge intact, we can't be just reorganizing stuff all the time. So we have to balance between stored knowledge and what eventually becomes practical wisdom, for want of a better word, right? It means that you know how the world works. You've spent time learning about it, and you can quickly make decisions without having to think from first principles in every scenario that you're in. I mean, that's the trade-off that you get with age, right? Um, so yeah, I don't. That's where I would start is questioning the premise there, that the idea that more plasticity is better. Um,
Push back a little bit on that and why our evolutionary history might have made our brains this way, but why that might not be so adaptive now. It's obvious that the world is a lot more dynamic and a lot more fast paced than it ever was before. I would see great benefit to. I want to be learning as efficiently as possible until I'm 150 years old.
sure,
With modern technology and everything.
you could
You
make it.
know,
You could
I,
make it.
yeah, like that's like I'm a big learner. I've always loved learning. I want to be reading books and learning as much as I can from those books until I'm 150. So let's just take that example of I want to be able to learn the guitar when I'm 80 or pick up Korean when I'm 90 or
Yeah.
just I want to be able to, while having all of the crystallized modalities that make me a well-rounded human, be able to pick up things and learn things. And if I want to learn computer science when I'm 100, my brain is in good shape to do that. So that would be my, there's a lot
So
of things we can learn and want to learn as we
yeah,
as we
yeah,
grow
yeah.
older now.
No, absolutely. And so I'm not challenging that at all. I'm all behind that, and I'm just challenging the framing of it in the language of neuroplasticity, right? So if and I, beyond exercise and diet and sleep, the other thing that I would add to that is learning, right? So do keep learning, right? If you want to be learning, make a habit of it, and I think you can talk about those things at a psychological level in terms of, and a personal level in terms of the kinds of practices that will, yeah, keep you thinking about things and so on. That where there's a value to that, that doesn't have to be couched in this language of neuroplasticity that is only sort of arguably apt or appropriate for the kinds of things that we're talking about. We don't really know. And the one thing I would say is that I don't think um, so one of the challenges in this field is this question of transfer or generalizability. So for example, if you do Sudokus, uh, you know, once a day, does that mean that you'll be better able to learn something else? And that's a claim that is often made with some of these pop psychology interventions. Sorry, I shouldn't say pop psych. Well, they are a bit. Um, yeah. Okay. So the idea that if you practice, say, this mind training thing, that your cognition will improve on other tasks, and it turns out that there just isn't any good evidence for that. What happens when you practice the mind training thing or the Sudokus or whatever is you get better at the mind training game or the
Which
Sudoku.
is really sad, right? I wish it wasn't like that. I think everyone wish it
Yeah,
wasn't like that, but not that you could become better at something completely unrelated to
right.
Sudokus by doing Sudokus. But there is always this nice idea that, by challenging yourself and learning, there's some generalizability, right? I mean,
Well, yeah, I mean, I maybe, I would say that maybe maintaining an open mind and a level of curiosity is just a habit, right? It's just a habit of thought that can be cultivated. And again, I would be very happy to endorse that kind of view in in psychological terms, right? I just again don't see the added benefit of adding neuro in front of any of the terms that we're using to discuss.
but it sounds more scientific, so it clearly has more efficacy if it has the neuro word,
That's
clearly.
exactly right. I mean that, and if you can add a picture of a brain scan, well,
Oh
so
yeah.
much better. That's super
With an
science.
arrow to a particular region with a
No, that's
thing,
not that. It's this
just a
thing.
random area. Yeah, yeah, for sure. That all adds to the efficacy of the technique.
Yeah, there's extra truthiness when you can put a brain scan picture. I mean, there's evidence showing that, right? That people find the same story uh, with or without like an arbitrary brain picture. They find the one with the picture more convincing sounding, and I mean that's reasonable. People looking at that who aren't trained in the field can't evaluate whether it makes sense or not, but it looks more concrete than just a description in words of these habits of keeping an open mind, for example. There's a sense in which that's a bit wishy-washy, but I don't think that's fair. I mean, psychology is is a whole science unto itself. It doesn't need neuroscience to make it more valid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the reason I wanted to keep talking about the neuroplasticity one is because it's such a hot topic at the moment. And I was watching a podcast a few months ago with are you familiar with the Diary of the CEO podcast with Stephen Bartlett? He's a UK entrepreneur, but the podcast is basically the biggest podcast in the world at the moment.
Mm.
And his most popular podcast is with this woman called Dr. Tara Swart. I've made a few reaction clips to her claims that she was making on this podcast because
Okay.
they're utter bollocks. They're just shite. And I've used my language. They're completely crazy. There's about 6 claims she made that I found just verifiable evidence that not just that she wasn't saying the truth, but it was the exact opposite. And
Okay.
one of the claims that she made was that there's 2 things that we can do to improve neuroplasticity in the brain. 2 of the most important, and one of them is aerobic exercise. Fine, great. I'd say that's number 1. The second one is eating dark-skinned fruits. And I just immediately paused the video and was like, did I just hallucinate? Did she just say that the oversleep or diet or having social friends or even just learning itself? She said that eating dark skinned fruits is the second, and I was like, okay, do some research into this. Dark skinned fruits have a dark pigment called anthocyanins. They contain antioxidants. Okay, I see where the chain of logic is coming from. But no, there's absolutely no evidence for this. And, antioxidants are much more important in older individuals because they've built up metabolic stress. It clears up reactive oxygen species, but this is obviously nuance that she completely left out. She said
Yeah.
to a general audience, the second most important thing you can do out of any activity in the world is to eat dark skinned fruits. And this podcast has 11 million views. 11, it's the most viewed podcast on
Yeah.
his whole channel, and he's probably the biggest podcast in the world. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, this is crazy. This is
Yeah.
insane misinformation. It doesn't even sound correct, doesn't even sound accurate. The
That's
podcast
the,
host,
yeah, the thing that just like any normal person listening to that, a normal reaction would be, "The hell are you talking about? How could that possibly be true?"
yeah, it's like it doesn't even sound believable. If you enjoyed that short podcast clip, then I'm so confident you will enjoy even more the full conversation. You can click it here. Click it. Come on. You know you want to. Click it.